Road trips are supposed to be fun. Pack your car, hit the highway, see America. But every year, thousands of travelers experience something on our roads that changes them forever. Tonight, we're sharing 11 true stories from people who took normal trips on normal highways and encountered things that shouldn't exist. These aren't ghost stories or urban legends. These are documented incidents with police reports, hospital records, and survivors who agreed to share what happened to them. After hearing these stories, you'll never look at a dark highway the same way again. Let's move to our first story. This incident occurred in January 2019 on Interstate 80 through Nevada, one of the most desolate stretches of highway in America. The person involved was Sandra, a 28-year-old marketing executive from San Francisco who had just lost her job and was driving to Denver to stay with family while she figured out her next move. Sandra left San Francisco on a Tuesday evening around 6 p.m., planning to drive through the night to avoid traffic and arrive in Denver by Wednesday afternoon. She was an experienced long-distance driver who had made similar trips before. Her car was a reliable 2017 Honda Accord in excellent condition, and she had a full tank of gas, plenty of water, and her phone fully charged. The weather forecast showed clear skies across Nevada with no storms expected. The first few hours went smoothly. Sandra drove through Sacramento and into the Sierra Nevada mountains without incident. She stopped for gas in Truckee around 9 p.m. and grabbed coffee and snacks for the long stretch ahead. By 11 p.m., she was crossing into Nevada, where Interstate 80 becomes a straight line through hundreds of miles of desert, with only occasional towns breaking the monotony. At exactly 12:30 a.m., Sandra's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw a number she didn't recognize with a Nevada area code. Thinking it might be related to a job interview she had scheduled, she answered using her car's Bluetooth system. The line was completely silent. After saying hello several times with no response, she hung up. 30 minutes later, the same number called again. This time, Sandra let it go to voicemail. But when she checked the message, there was nothing but silence, followed by the sound of the call ending. She assumed it was a telemarketer or robocall system malfunctioning and deleted the voicemail. The calls continued every 30 minutes exactly. At 1:30 a.m., 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m., and 3 a.m. Each time, Sandra would answer hoping to tell whoever it was to stop calling. But the line remained silent, except for what sounded like faint breathing. She tried blocking the number, but somehow the calls kept coming through. Her phone showed the same number each time, but the blocking feature seemed to have no effect. Around 3:30 a.m., Sandra was passing through Winnemucca, Nevada, a small town that serves as one of the few stops along this section of I-80. She decided to pull off at a gas station to use the restroom and stretch her legs. As she was walking back to her car, her phone rang again. Same number. This time, when she answered, a man's voice spoke. "Blue Honda Accord," the voice said calmly. "Nevada license plate." Then he recited her complete license plate number. Sandra's blood went cold. She spun around, scanning the gas station parking lot, but saw only 2 semi-trucks and an old pickup truck. No other cars. No one standing around who could see her vehicle or her plates. The voice on the phone continued. "Black jacket? Blue jeans? Brown boots? You're standing next to pump number 4. Sandra was indeed wearing exactly what the caller described. She was standing next to pump 4. Her hands started shaking as she quickly got back in her car and locked the doors. The caller was still on the line. "Don't hang up, Sandra," the voice said. "We need to talk." She had never given her name to anyone at the gas station. It wasn't written anywhere visible in her car. The caller somehow knew who she was. Sandra ended the call and immediately dialed 911, but her phone showed no signal. She tried again, but couldn't connect to emergency services. Her phone had full bars just minutes earlier. Sandra drove quickly back onto Interstate 80, her heart pounding. She pushed her car faster than she normally would, hoping to reach the next town quickly. Her phone remained without signal for the next 20 miles, which was unusual for this section of highway. When the signal finally returned around 4:15 a.m., she immediately tried calling 911, but before she could connect, her phone rang again. Same number. This time she didn't answer, but the caller left a voicemail. When she played it back, the man's voice was clearer than before. "You can't outrun us, Sandra. We know exactly where you're going. Take exit 194 in 15 miles. There's something you need to see." Sandra knew Interstate 80 well enough to know that exit 194 led to an industrial area outside of Lovelock, Nevada. There was nothing out there except some old mining equipment and abandoned buildings. The caller was trying to get her to leave the main highway and go somewhere isolated. She stayed on Interstate 80, refusing to take the exit. But as she passed exit 194, she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror that seemed to be following at the exact same speed she was traveling. When she sped up, the lights sped up. When she slowed down, they slowed down. The vehicle was maintaining a consistent distance of about a quarter mile behind her. Her phone rang again. This time the caller's tone was different, more aggressive. "You should have taken the exit, Sandra. Now we have to do this the hard way." The headlights behind her suddenly accelerated. Sandra could see it was a large pickup truck, possibly a Ford F-250, dark-colored but hard to make out details in her mirrors. The truck pulled up close behind her, its headlights filling her car with bright light. Then it backed off and repeated the maneuver. It was clearly trying to intimidate her or force her to pull over. Sandra pressed the accelerator harder, pushing her Honda to 85 miles per hour, then 90. The truck easily kept pace. Her phone was ringing constantly now, the same number over and over. She ignored the calls and focused on driving, but the truck was becoming more aggressive, pulling up alongside her in the left lane and pacing her speed. Through the truck's passenger window, Sandra could see two figures, but couldn't make out any details in the darkness. The truck would pull ahead, then slow down to force her to slow down, then drop back and repeat the process. This continued for nearly 20 miles. At 5:15 a.m., Sandra saw the lights of Lovelock, Nevada ahead. The truck immediately dropped back and disappeared. She couldn't see its headlights anywhere in her mirrors. Her phone stopped ringing. The sudden return to normalcy was almost as unnerving as the harassment had been. Sandra pulled off at the first Lovelock exit and found an open truck stop. She parked directly under the brightest lights she could find and went inside to report the incident to the clerk, who called the local sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez arrived within 15 minutes and took a detailed report. When Deputy Martinez examined Sandra's phone records later that morning, something strange became apparent. The calls she had been receiving showed up in her phone's call log, but when the deputy contacted the phone company to trace the number, they found no record of any calls being placed to Sandra's phone during the time period in question. According to the cellular company's records, Sandra's phone had been completely inactive from midnight until 5:30 a.m. The deputy also checked traffic cameras along Interstate 80 for the time period Sandra described. The cameras showed her Honda traveling along the highway exactly as she described. But no pickup truck was visible in any of the footage. The cameras clearly showed the road behind and around her car, but she appeared to be driving alone the entire time. Deputy Martinez interviewed the clerk at the Winnemucca gas station where Sandra had stopped. The clerk remembered her stopping for fuel, but said she had seemed nervous and kept looking around the parking lot as if she was afraid of something. However, the clerk confirmed that during the time Sandra was there, only the vehicles she mentioned were in the lot: 2 semi-trucks and an old pickup. The pickup belonged to a local rancher who was a regular customer, and he had been inside the station the entire time paying for fuel and buying supplies. The mystery deepened when Deputy Martinez discovered that Sandra's GPS unit had malfunctioned during the incident. Her car's navigation system showed that she had driven in a complete circle 3 times between Winnemucca and Lovelock, covering the same 47-mile stretch of highway repeatedly. However, Sandra insisted she had driven straight through without turning around or taking any exits, except the one in Lovelock, where she stopped to report the incident. A week later, Sandra received a call from a Nevada Highway Patrol investigator who specialized in unusual incidents along Interstate 80. The investigator told her that over the past 5 years, they had received 17 similar reports from drivers traveling that same stretch of highway. All involved mysterious phone calls from untraceable numbers, followed by harassment from vehicles that didn't appear on traffic cameras or in cellular company records. The investigator explained that this section of Interstate 80 passes through an area where several underground military facilities are located, and electronic interference from these installations sometimes causes GPS units and cellular phones to malfunction in unpredictable ways. The investigator theorized that Sandra had experienced a combination of electronic interference and sleep deprivation that caused her to become disoriented and imagine threats that weren't actually present. However, Sandra remained convinced that someone had been following and harassing her that night. She pointed out that she had been well rested when the incident began, having slept for 8 hours before starting her drive. She also noted that the caller had known specific details about her appearance and location that couldn't be explained by electronic interference. Sandra completed her drive to Denver without further incident, but she has never driven through Nevada at night again. She now flies when she needs to travel long distances, and she refuses to drive alone on any highway after dark. The experience fundamentally changed how she thinks about road travel, and she remains convinced that something more than electronic interference was responsible for what happened to her that night on Interstate 80. The Nevada Highway Patrol continues to investigate similar incidents along this stretch of highway, but no definitive explanation has been found for the pattern of reports they continue to receive from drivers traveling through this area. Let's move to our second story. This incident occurred in August 2016 on Highway 50 in Nevada, often called America's loneliest highway, due to the vast stretches of desert it crosses with minimal services or population centers. The people involved were Jeffrey and Jacob, a married couple in their early 40s from Phoenix, Arizona, who were driving to Reno for Jeffrey's brother's wedding. The couple had been married for 15 years and were experienced road travelers who took several long-distance driving trips each year. They left Phoenix on a Friday morning in their 2014 Toyota Camry, planning to take the scenic route through Nevada rather than the faster but more monotonous interstate route. Highway 50 offered them a chance to see some of Nevada's historic mining towns and desert landscapes they had never visited before. Their plan was straightforward: drive to Ely, Nevada on Friday, spend the night there, then continue to Reno on Saturday morning in time for the wedding rehearsal dinner. Jeffrey had researched the route carefully and knew that services were limited along Highway 50, so they had packed extra water, snacks, and emergency supplies in case of car trouble. The drive from Phoenix to Ely went smoothly. They stopped for lunch in Alamo, Nevada, and arrived in Ely around 4 p.m. However, when they tried to check into the hotel Jeffrey had booked online, they were told the reservation couldn't be found in the system. The hotel was fully booked due to a local festival they hadn't known about. After checking with 3 other hotels in town, they discovered that every room in Ely was occupied. The desk clerk at the last hotel they tried suggested they might find accommodations in Austin, Nevada, about 70 miles west on Highway 50. He warned them that Austin was a very small town with limited options, but said there were a couple of motels that might have availability. Since it was already getting late and they needed to be in Reno the next evening, Jeffrey and Jacob decided to drive to Austin and look for a room there. They left Ely around 6:30 p.m. and drove west on Highway 50 as the sun began setting over the Nevada desert. The landscape was spectacular but desolate, with long stretches where they didn't see another vehicle or any signs of human habitation. As they drove, Jacob used his phone to search for motels in Austin, but the internet connection was spotty, and he was having trouble getting reliable information about what accommodations were actually available. Around 8:15 p.m., with darkness falling and still about 20 miles from Austin according to their GPS, they saw a sign they hadn't expected. Desert Rose Motel, next right, vacancy. The sign looked old but well maintained, with working neon lights advertising the availability of rooms. Jeffrey and Jacob looked at each other with relief. Neither of them had seen this motel mentioned in any of their research, but finding any accommodation in this remote area felt like good fortune. They took the exit and followed a paved road about half a mile off the highway to a motel that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. The Desert Rose Motel was a classic roadside motor lodge, with a main office building and 12 individual units arranged in an L shape around a small parking area. The buildings were painted turquoise and white, with vintage neon signs that were fully lit despite the remote location. Several other cars were parked in front of units, suggesting the motel had other guests. The office was clean and well maintained, with period-appropriate furniture and decorations that looked authentic rather than artificially retro. Behind the front desk stood a friendly man in his 60s, wearing a short-sleeved white shirt and black tie. Exactly what you might expect from a motel clerk from decades past. He greeted them warmly and said he had a nice room available for $45 per night, which seemed remarkably reasonable. Jeffrey paid cash for the room, and they were given a physical key attached to a plastic keychain with the motel's logo. The clerk provided them with a small map showing local restaurants and points of interest, and recommended they try the diner across the street, which he said served excellent home-cooked meals. When Jeffrey asked about the motel's history, the clerk explained that it had been family-owned since 1952 and prided itself on maintaining the classic roadside motel experience that was disappearing from American highways. Their room was spacious and immaculately clean, decorated with authentic 1950s furniture and fixtures. The bathroom had vintage tile work and a pedestal sink that appeared original but functioned perfectly. The beds were comfortable with crisp white linens, and the air conditioning worked quietly and efficiently. Jacob commented that it was one of the nicest motel rooms he had stayed in, especially considering the remote location and low price. They walked across the street to the recommended diner, which was busy with local customers and other motel guests. The food was excellent and the service friendly. They struck up conversations with other travelers who were staying at the Desert Rose, including a retired couple from California and a salesman from Utah who said he stayed there regularly when traveling through the area. Everyone they talked to praised the motel's quality and value. After dinner, Jeffrey and Jacob returned to their room and spent the evening relaxing and planning the next day's drive to Reno. They both felt fortunate to have found such a pleasant place to stay in what they had expected to be a challenging situation. Jacob posted a positive review of the Desert Rose Motel on TripAdvisor before they went to sleep, praising the authentic vintage atmosphere and excellent service. They slept soundly and woke up around 7 a.m. to bright sunlight streaming through their room's windows. Jeffrey opened the door to get some fresh air and was startled to find himself looking out at empty desert. There was no motel office, no other buildings, no diner across the street, no other cars, and no paved road leading back to the highway. They were parked in a flat area of desert scrub with tire tracks leading away toward Highway 50, which was visible about half a mile in the distance. Jacob joined Jeffrey at the door, and they both stared in disbelief at the landscape around them. There was absolutely no trace of the Desert Rose Motel or any of the buildings they had seen the night before. No foundations, no utility connections, no debris. Nothing to indicate that any structures had ever existed in this location. Their car was sitting on bare ground, with no pavement beneath it. They quickly packed their belongings and drove their car carefully across the desert terrain back to Highway 50, following what appeared to be tire tracks from their arrival the previous evening. Once back on the paved highway, they stopped and tried to locate the exit they had taken to reach the motel. There was no exit. The highway ran straight through this area with no off-ramps or side roads for miles in either direction. Jeffrey and Jacob drove to Austin and found the local sheriff's office, where they reported what had happened. Deputy Karen Williams listened to their story with professional patience, but obvious skepticism. She had worked in this area for 12 years and knew every business and structure along Highway 50. There had never been a Desert Rose Motel anywhere in the region, and certainly not at the location they described. Deputy Williams drove them back to the area where they claimed to have stayed. She confirmed that there was no evidence of any recent construction or structures at that location. The desert floor showed no disturbance except for their car's tire tracks from that morning. She explained that the nearest motel was in Austin, 15 miles away, and the next closest accommodations were back in Ely, where they had started looking for a room. When they returned to Austin, Jeffrey tried to check his TripAdvisor account to show the deputy his review of the Desert Rose Motel. The review was not there. There was no record of him posting any review the previous evening. When he searched TripAdvisor for Desert Rose Motel, Nevada, no results were found. Jacob tried searching Google for the same motel name and location, but found no websites, reviews, or references to any business by that name in Nevada. They checked their credit card and bank statements on their phones. Jeffrey's payment for the motel room did not appear in any of their financial records. There was no charge for $45 or any amount to any motel from the previous evening. According to their financial records, the last transaction had been for dinner in Ely before they left town. Deputy Williams suggested they might have driven further than they realized and stayed at a different motel, possibly in Austin, and become confused about the location due to fatigue. However, they checked with both motels in Austin, and neither had any record of Jeffrey and Jacob staying there or any guests matching their description checking in the previous evening. The deputy also suggested they might have experienced some kind of shared hallucination caused by carbon monoxide poisoning from their car's exhaust system. She arranged for their vehicle to be inspected by a local mechanic. But the inspection found no problems with the exhaust system or any other mechanical issues that could have caused them to inhale toxic fumes. 3 days after returning home to Phoenix, Jeffrey received a call from Nevada historian Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in researching ghost towns and abandoned settlements throughout the state. Dr. Mitchell had heard about their story from Deputy Williams and was intrigued by their description of the Desert Rose Motel. Dr. Mitchell told them that her research had uncovered records of a motel by that exact name that had operated in that general area from 1952 to 1961. The Desert Rose Motel had been a popular stop for travelers on Highway 50 until a fire in August 1961 destroyed the entire complex, killing the owner and 3 guests. After the fire, the land had been abandoned and eventually returned to its natural desert state. Dr. Mitchell showed them photographs from the Nevada State Historical Society archives that matched their description of the motel's layout and appearance exactly. The photos showed the same turquoise and white buildings, the same neon signs, and even the same office interior they remembered. The man behind the desk in one photo looked remarkably similar to the clerk they had encountered. According to Dr. Mitchell's research, the exact location of the original Desert Rose Motel had been lost over the decades as Highway 50 was rerouted and old records were misplaced or destroyed. However, based on Jeffrey and Jacob's description and GPS coordinates, she believed they had found the precise site where the motel had once stood. Jeffrey and Jacob returned to Nevada 6 months later with Dr. Mitchell to revisit the location. Using metal detectors, they found buried remnants of the motel's foundation and several artifacts, including pieces of vintage neon tubing, old room keys, and fragments of turquoise paint that matched the buildings they remembered seeing. The Nevada State Historical Society has since added the Desert Rose Motel location to their official records, based on Jeffrey and Jacob's account and the physical evidence discovered at the site. However, no explanation has ever been found for how they experienced staying at a motel that had been destroyed 55 years before their visit. Both Jeffrey and Jacob remain convinced that they actually stayed at the Desert Rose Motel on that night, in August 2016. They have polygraph tests and psychological evaluations showing no indication of deception or mental illness. The physical evidence discovered at the site supports their description of the original motel's appearance and layout. They still travel regularly, but now always verify their hotel reservations through multiple sources and avoid staying at any accommodations that aren't clearly documented in current business directories. Let's move to our third story. This incident occurred in October 2020 on Interstate 75 through rural Georgia, specifically in the area between Macon and Valdosta, where the highway passes through long stretches of pine forest and farmland. The person involved was David Park, a 24-year-old college student at the University of Florida, who was driving home to visit his family in Atlanta during fall break. David was a senior studying computer science and had made this same drive dozens of times over his 4 years in college. He was familiar with the route and typically drove straight through without stopping except for gas, since the trip normally took about 4.5 hours. On this particular Friday evening in October, he left Gainesville around 3 p.m., planning to arrive in Atlanta by 8 p.m. for dinner with his parents and younger sister. The weather was clear and traffic was light as David drove north through Florida and crossed into Georgia. He had filled up his gas tank in Valdosta and was making good time, listening to music and looking forward to spending the weekend at home. His 2018 Nissan Sentra was running perfectly, and he had made this drive so many times that he barely had to think about the route. Interstate 75 through South Georgia was familiar territory. Around 6 p.m., about 30 miles south of Macon, David noticed a pickup truck in his rearview mirror that seemed to be following closer than normal. The truck was a large, dark-colored Ford F-150 with tinted windows and what appeared to be multiple occupants. David was driving in the right lane at about 70 miles per hour, which was the speed limit. But the truck was tailgating aggressively, even though the left lane was completely open for passing. David moved into the left lane to allow the truck to pass, but instead of going around him, the truck also moved into the left lane and continued following closely behind. When David returned to the right lane, the truck followed him there as well. This pattern continued for several miles, with the truck maintaining an uncomfortably close distance regardless of which lane David chose or how fast he drove. Growing concerned about the aggressive driving behavior, David decided to exit at the next off-ramp to let the truck pass and put some distance between them. He took exit 127, which led to a small rural community called Ashburn. As he drove down the exit ramp, he was surprised to see the pickup truck follow him off the interstate. This confirmed his suspicion that the truck's behavior wasn't just aggressive driving, but deliberate harassment or worse. David drove into Ashburn looking for a gas station or store where he could stop and wait for the truck to leave the area. However, as he entered the small town, he noticed that the pickup truck wasn't alone. Two other vehicles, a white panel van and a dark SUV, appeared from side streets and began following behind the original truck. All three vehicles were now following David through the town in what was clearly coordinated behavior. Realizing he was in serious trouble, David tried to call 911 on his cell phone, but discovered he had no signal. This was unusual because he normally had decent coverage throughout this area of Georgia. He continued driving through Ashburn looking for help, but noticed that the town seemed unusually deserted for early evening on a Friday. The few businesses he passed appeared to be closed, and he saw no other people on the streets. The three vehicles continued following him as he drove through the small downtown area and out the other side of town onto rural back roads. David was now completely lost and had no idea how to get back to Interstate 75. The roads were narrow and winding, passing through dense pine forest with no houses or businesses visible. His fuel gauge showed he still had plenty of gas, but he was becoming increasingly panicked about his situation. David tried several times to turn around and head back toward town, but each time he attempted to change direction, one of the pursuing vehicles would speed up and block his path. It became clear that they were herding him deeper into the rural area, away from any possible help. The coordination between the three vehicles suggested this was a well-practiced operation, not a spontaneous incident. Around 7:30 p.m., with daylight fading, David found himself on a dirt road deep in the forest. His car wasn't designed for off-road driving, and he was struggling to maintain control on the rough surface. Behind him, the three vehicles had closed the distance and were taking turns pulling up close to his rear bumper, apparently trying to force him to stop or cause an accident. David managed to call 911 when his phone briefly found a signal, but the connection was poor and kept cutting out. The dispatcher could barely understand him, but he was able to provide his name and mentioned that he was being chased by multiple vehicles somewhere off Interstate 75 near exit 127. The call dropped before he could provide more details, and he wasn't able to reconnect. As darkness fell, David realized he was completely lost in an area he had never seen before. The dirt roads seemed to go on endlessly through the forest, and he had no idea which direction would lead him back to civilization. His pursuers were still behind him, and he could see their headlights whenever he looked in his mirrors. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, while he was driving blindly through unfamiliar territory. Around 9 p.m., David spotted what appeared to be an abandoned barn or warehouse building ahead. Desperate to hide from his pursuers, he turned off his headlights and carefully drove behind the building, hoping to conceal his car in the darkness. He shut off his engine and sat quietly, listening for sounds of the other vehicles. For the next several hours, David remained hidden behind the building while the three vehicles searched the area. He could hear their engines and see their headlights sweeping through the forest as they drove back and forth on the dirt roads nearby. Several times they came very close to his hiding spot, but somehow they didn't find him. David remained completely still and quiet, afraid that any movement or sound might give away his location. Around 3 a.m., the sounds of the searching vehicles finally stopped. David waited another hour to make sure they were really gone before starting his car and trying to find his way back to the interstate. In the darkness, all the dirt roads looked the same, and he drove for nearly 2 more hours before finally reaching a paved road that led back to a main highway. David eventually found his way back to Interstate 75 around 5:30 a.m., nearly 12 hours after he had taken exit 127. He was exhausted, traumatized, and completely disoriented about where he had been or how far he had traveled during the night. He drove straight to the Georgia State Patrol post in Macon and reported what had happened to him. Trooper Michael Rodriguez took David's statement and immediately began investigating the incident. When they tried to locate exit 127 on Interstate 75, they discovered a significant problem. According to Georgia Department of Transportation records, there was no exit 127 on Interstate 75 in that area. The exits in that section of highway were numbered 121, 125, 129, and 135, but no exit 127 existed. Trooper Rodriguez drove David back to the area where he claimed to have left the interstate. They found exit 125, which led to a different town than the one David described, and exit 129, which was about 15 miles north of where David said he had gotten off. There was no exit or off-ramp between these two locations, and no town called Ashburn accessible from Interstate 75 in that area. David insisted that he had definitely taken an exit marked 127 and had definitely driven through a town called Ashburn. But Trooper Rodriguez's investigation showed that the nearest town named Ashburn was in a completely different part of Georgia, more than 200 miles away from Interstate 75. David's description of the town didn't match any communities along that section of the highway. When they examined David's cell phone records, they found the 911 call he had made around 7:30 p.m. However, according to the cellular company's records, the call had originated from a location nearly 50 miles away from where David claimed to be at that time. The GPS data from his phone showed that he had been driving in circles in a very small area for several hours, rather than traveling the long distances through forest roads that he remembered. The investigation took an interesting turn when Trooper Rodriguez contacted the DEA task force that operated in South Georgia. Agent Sarah Williams told him that the area where David's GPS data showed him driving was the site of an active methamphetamine manufacturing and distribution operation that had been under federal surveillance for several months. Agent Williams explained that the criminal organization used sophisticated tactics to detect and deter anyone who accidentally discovered their operations. They maintained lookouts along nearby roads and would pursue and intimidate any outsiders who came too close to their facilities. The organization was known to use multiple vehicles working together to chase away potential witnesses, exactly as David had described. According to Agent Williams, David had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of an active drug operation when he left the interstate. The criminals had followed him to make sure he left the area and didn't report what he had seen. However, because David had become lost and disoriented, the chase had continued much longer than usual, and the criminals had eventually given up when they realized he posed no immediate threat to their operations. The federal task force used David's information to help locate and raid the drug operation 2 weeks later. They arrested 12 people and seized large quantities of methamphetamine, weapons, and cash. Several of the arrested individuals matched David's descriptions of the people he had seen in the pursuing vehicles. Agent Williams theorized that David's confusion about exit numbers and town names had been caused by the extreme stress of being pursued for hours by dangerous criminals. The adrenaline and fear had affected his memory and perception, causing him to misremember details about where he had been and what he had seen. However, his core account of being chased by multiple vehicles was completely accurate. David completed his drive to Atlanta the next day, arriving 24 hours later than planned. He told his family what had happened, but struggled to explain why he couldn't remember exactly where he had been or how he had gotten lost for so many hours. The discrepancies in his story made it difficult for them to understand what he had experienced. 6 months later, David received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, thanking him for his cooperation in the investigation that led to the successful prosecution of the drug trafficking organization. The letter confirmed that his report had provided crucial information that helped federal agents locate and shut down a major criminal operation. David graduated from college the following spring and now works as a software developer in Atlanta. He still drives regularly, but has never again taken an unmarked exit or driven alone through rural areas at night. The experience taught him how quickly a routine trip can become dangerous when you encounter the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let's move to our fourth story. This incident occurred in March 2018 on Highway 101 along the Oregon coast, one of the most scenic drives in America, but also one where cell phone coverage can be spotty and help is often far away. The person involved was Lisa, a 35-year-old registered nurse from Portland who was driving home from a medical conference in San Francisco. Lisa had attended a 3-day conference on emergency room procedures and was making the drive back to Portland alone, planning to take the coastal route because she enjoyed the ocean views and had the extra time. She was an experienced traveler who often drove long distances for work and had made similar trips along Highway 101 several times before. Her 2016 Subaru Outback was reliable and well-maintained, and she had packed emergency supplies, including water, snacks, a first aid kit, and an emergency beacon. The conference had ended on Thursday afternoon, and Lisa left San Francisco around 2 p.m., planning to drive to Eureka, California for the night, then continue to Portland on Friday. The weather was overcast, but not rainy, which was typical for the Oregon coast in March. Traffic was light, and she was making good progress north along the winding coastal highway. Around 4 p.m., as Lisa was driving through a particularly remote section of Highway 101 between Crescent City and Gold Beach, she noticed a woman standing beside a broken-down car on the shoulder of the road. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s with dark hair and was wearing jeans and a blue jacket. She was waving for help, and her car, a silver Honda Civic, had its hood up and hazard lights flashing. Lisa pulled over to offer assistance, as she would normally do for anyone stranded on a remote highway. As a nurse, she felt a professional obligation to help people in distress, and she had jumper cables and basic tools in her car that might be useful. The woman walked over to Lisa's car and introduced herself as Michelle, explaining that her car had suddenly lost power and wouldn't restart. As they talked, Lisa noticed something unsettling. Michelle looked remarkably similar to her younger sister Rebecca, who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The resemblance was so strong that Lisa felt momentarily disoriented, as if she was looking at Rebecca as she would have appeared if she had lived to age 32. Michelle had the same facial structure, the same hair color, and even some of the same mannerisms that Lisa remembered about her sister. Michelle asked if Lisa could give her a ride to the next town to find a mechanic or call for a tow truck. She said she had no cell phone signal and had been stranded for over an hour. Lisa agreed to help and offered to let Michelle use her phone first to see if they could get a signal from a different location. However, when Lisa checked her phone, she also had no signal, which was unusual because she normally had at least some coverage along this section of highway. As they drove toward the next town, Michelle began making conversation that became increasingly personal and specific. She asked Lisa about her work as a nurse, then mentioned that she had heard nursing was a difficult profession, especially for someone who had lost a family member in a medical emergency. Lisa hadn't mentioned anything about losing her sister, and she found it strange that Michelle would bring up such a specific topic. Michelle then asked if Lisa had any siblings, and when Lisa mentioned that she had had a younger sister who passed away, Michelle nodded sympathetically and said she was sorry for her loss. She asked how Rebecca had died, using Lisa's sister's name, even though Lisa was certain she had never mentioned it. When Lisa asked how Michelle knew her sister's name, Michelle claimed that Lisa had mentioned it earlier in their conversation, but Lisa was certain she had not. The conversation became more disturbing when Michelle began describing details about Rebecca's life that only family members would know. She mentioned Rebecca's job at a veterinary clinic, her favorite restaurant in Portland, and even the name of her cat, Muffin. Michelle spoke about these details as if she had known Rebecca personally. But when Lisa asked how she could possibly know such specific information, Michelle became evasive and changed the subject. As they continued driving, Lisa noticed that Michelle's appearance seemed to be changing subtly. Her hair appeared to be getting darker, and her facial features seemed to be shifting to look even more like Rebecca. Lisa began to wonder if the stress of the situation was causing her to see things that weren't there, or if something more unusual was happening. Michelle then began talking about Lisa's personal life in ways that made her extremely uncomfortable. She mentioned Lisa's apartment address in Portland, the hospital where she worked, and even the names of some of her co-workers. She knew that Lisa had been dating someone named Marcus for 8 months, and that they were considering moving in together. She knew that Lisa's parents lived in Salem, and that her father had recently retired from teaching high school chemistry. When Lisa demanded to know how Michelle could possibly know such personal information about her life, Michelle smiled in a way that reminded Lisa exactly of how Rebecca used to smile when she was keeping a secret. Michelle said that she had ways of learning about people, and that Lisa shouldn't worry about it because she was only trying to help. Lisa began to feel genuinely frightened and started looking for an opportunity to end the situation. She told Michelle that she would drop her off at the next gas station and that Michelle could find other help from there. However, when they reached the next town, Michelle insisted that Lisa drive to a specific location where she said her friend lived and could help with her car. The location Michelle directed her to was a small house on a rural road several miles off the main highway. Lisa became increasingly nervous about going to an isolated location with someone who clearly knew far too much about her personal life. She told Michelle that she would prefer to take her to the gas station they had passed. But Michelle became insistent and gave Lisa specific turn-by-turn directions that seemed to indicate detailed knowledge of the local area. As they drove toward the house, Lisa noticed that Michelle was no longer looking exactly like Rebecca. Her appearance seemed to be shifting again, becoming more generic and less distinctive. Lisa began to suspect that her initial impression of the resemblance to her sister might have been influenced by some kind of psychological manipulation or suggestion. When they reached the house Michelle had directed her to, Lisa saw that it appeared to be abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the yard was overgrown, and there were no vehicles in the driveway. Lisa told Michelle that she was not comfortable going to an abandoned house and insisted on returning to the main highway immediately. Michelle's demeanor suddenly changed completely. She became agitated and demanding, insisting that Lisa come inside the house with her. She claimed that her friend was definitely there and that Lisa was being unreasonable by refusing to help. Her voice took on a different quality, becoming more aggressive and less friendly than it had been earlier. Lisa decided to end the situation immediately. She told Michelle to get out of her car and that she would call for help once she reached an area with cell phone coverage. Michelle refused to get out and began making threats, saying that Lisa couldn't just abandon her and that she would regret not being more helpful. At this point, Lisa realized she was dealing with someone who was potentially dangerous and mentally unstable. She had received training in dealing with psychiatric emergencies during her nursing career, and Michelle's behavior was showing clear signs of delusional thinking and possible personality disorder. Lisa told Michelle firmly that she needed to exit the vehicle immediately, or she would drive directly to the nearest police station. Michelle finally got out of the car, but as she did, she made several statements that revealed she had been researching Lisa's background extensively. She mentioned Lisa's social media accounts, her online shopping preferences, and even recent text conversations Lisa had had with Marcus. It became clear that Michelle had been stalking Lisa online and had deliberately positioned herself to be rescued when Lisa drove by. Lisa drove directly to the Brookings Police Department and reported the incident to Officer Jennifer Thompson. Officer Thompson took a detailed statement and immediately dispatched officers to check on Michelle and the abandoned house. However, when the officers arrived at the location, they found no sign of Michelle or her supposedly broken-down car. The investigation revealed that Michelle's stranded car scenario had been completely fabricated. There were no reports of abandoned vehicles in the area where Lisa had first encountered Michelle, and no tow truck companies had received calls about a broken-down Honda Civic on that section of highway. Video footage from a gas station about 5 miles south of where Lisa had picked up Michelle showed Michelle walking along the highway earlier that afternoon, with no car in sight. Officer Thompson discovered that Michelle's real name was Patricia Hendricks, a 29-year-old woman with a history of mental illness and stalking behavior. Patricia had been following Lisa's online activities for several months, gathering personal information from social media posts, professional directory listings, and other public sources. She had learned about Lisa's travel plans from a Facebook post about the medical conference and had positioned herself along Lisa's likely route home. The investigation revealed that Patricia had a pattern of targeting healthcare workers, particularly nurses, by creating fake emergency situations to get them to stop and help her. She would then use the personal information she had gathered to manipulate and frighten her victims, often demanding money or other assistance. Lisa was the 7th known victim of Patricia's scheme, though most of the previous incidents had not been reported to police. Patricia was arrested 2 days later at a campground near the Oregon-California border. She had extensive files of personal information about several dozen healthcare workers throughout Oregon and Northern California, including photographs, social media screenshots, work schedules, and family details. She had been using this information to stalk and harass her targets for over 2 years. During her arrest, Patricia was found to have theatrical makeup and costume accessories that she used to alter her appearance to resemble family members or friends of her victims. She had studied photographs of Lisa's sister Rebecca and had deliberately styled herself to look similar, knowing that this would create an emotional reaction that would make Lisa more likely to help her. Patricia was charged with stalking, harassment, and attempted kidnapping. She pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 3 years in prison, plus mandatory psychiatric treatment. The court ordered her to have no contact with any of her victims and restricted her internet access upon her release. Lisa continued working as a nurse, but became much more cautious about stopping to help stranded motorists, especially when traveling alone. She installed a dash camera in her car and now carries pepper spray when traveling. She also significantly restricted her social media presence and changed her privacy settings to limit the personal information available to strangers online. The incident taught Lisa that predators increasingly use social media and other online sources to gather intelligence about their potential victims, making it possible for complete strangers to appear to know intimate details about someone's life. She now advises other healthcare workers to be aware of this tactic and to trust their instincts when someone they've just met seems to know more about them than they should. The Oregon State Police have since issued warnings about this type of stalking scheme and advise travelers to be cautious about stopping to help strangers, especially if the person seems to know personal information about them or their family members. They recommend calling 911 to report stranded motorists rather than stopping to provide direct assistance, particularly in remote areas with limited cell phone coverage. Let's move to our 5th story. This incident occurred in July 2017 in Death Valley, California, one of the most extreme and dangerous environments in North America. Death Valley regularly experiences temperatures above 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, and the combination of extreme heat, isolation, and lack of services makes it one of the deadliest places for vehicle breakdowns. The person involved was Tyler Martinez, a 30-year-old construction contractor from Phoenix who was driving to Las Vegas for a job site meeting. Tyler was an experienced desert traveler who had grown up in Arizona and was familiar with the dangers of driving through extreme heat. He had made the Phoenix to Las Vegas drive many times before, usually taking Interstate 40 north through Flagstaff. But on this particular trip, he decided to take the more direct route through Death Valley to save time. His meeting in Las Vegas was scheduled for Friday morning, and he was leaving Phoenix on Thursday afternoon to drive straight through. Tyler was driving his 2015 Ford F-150 pickup truck, which he had purchased new and maintained meticulously. The truck had never given him any mechanical problems, and he had recently had it serviced, including a complete inspection of the cooling system, which is crucial for desert driving. He had packed extra water, a cooler with ice and sports drinks, emergency flares, a first aid kit, and a satellite emergency beacon that could summon help even in areas without cell phone coverage. The temperature when Tyler left Phoenix around 2 p.m. was 115 degrees, which was hot but not unusual for July in Arizona. He planned to drive through the hottest part of the day, while his air conditioning was working, then arrive in Las Vegas by evening when temperatures would be more manageable. Death Valley would be even hotter than Phoenix. But Tyler's truck was designed for extreme conditions, and he felt confident about making the trip. Tyler drove north through Arizona without incident, stopping for gas in Kingman before heading west toward California. As he entered Death Valley around 4 p.m., his truck's external temperature display was reading 118 degrees. The landscape was starkly beautiful but completely barren, with no vegetation and no signs of human habitation visible in any direction. Traffic was very light, with only occasional vehicles passing in either direction. Around 5 p.m., Tyler was driving through the most remote section of Death Valley when his truck's engine temperature gauge suddenly spiked into the red zone. Within seconds, steam began pouring from under the hood, and the engine made a loud grinding noise before shutting down completely. Tyler managed to guide the truck to the shoulder of the road before it stopped moving entirely. Tyler immediately understood the severity of his situation. He was approximately 30 miles from the nearest town in either direction, with no cell phone coverage and an outside temperature that his truck's thermometer had been reading as 120 degrees before the engine died. Without air conditioning, the temperature inside his truck would quickly become lethal. He had about 2 gallons of water with him, which would normally be sufficient for a day or two under normal conditions, but in extreme heat could be consumed much more quickly. Tyler's first priority was activating his satellite emergency beacon, which would alert search and rescue authorities to his location and situation. However, when he tried to turn on the device, he discovered that the extreme heat had damaged the battery compartment, causing the batteries to leak and corrode the internal components. The beacon was completely non-functional, leaving him with no way to call for help. Tyler knew that staying with his vehicle was the standard advice for desert breakdowns, as it would be easier for rescuers to spot than a person walking alone. However, he also knew that without air conditioning, the inside of his truck would reach temperatures that could kill him within hours. The outside temperature was already beyond what humans can survive for extended periods, and it would continue climbing until late evening. Tyler decided to try walking to get help, reasoning that staying with the truck was certain death, while walking at least gave him a chance of reaching assistance. He took 1 gallon of water, leaving the rest in case he needed to return to the truck, and began walking west toward what he hoped was the nearest town. He covered his head with a t-shirt and tried to stay in whatever shade was available along the roadside. But in the flat desert terrain, there were virtually no shadows. Within the first mile of walking, Tyler began experiencing the early stages of heat exhaustion. His heart rate increased dramatically, he began sweating profusely, and he felt nauseous and dizzy. The asphalt road surface was so hot that he could feel the heat through the soles of his work boots. He tried to walk on the shoulder when possible, but the rocky desert floor was nearly as hot as the pavement. After walking for about an hour, Tyler estimated he had covered roughly 2 miles, but he was already consuming water much faster than he had planned. The extreme heat was causing his body to lose fluid through sweating at a rate that was difficult to replace, and he was beginning to show signs of dehydration. His mouth was becoming dry, his urine was dark, and he was starting to feel confused and disoriented. Around 7 p.m., with the sun still high in the western sky, Tyler began experiencing heat stroke symptoms. His sweating stopped completely, which was a dangerous sign indicating that his body's cooling system was failing. His skin became hot and dry, his heart rate became irregular, and he started having difficulty thinking clearly. He was still about 25 miles from the nearest town and had consumed more than half of his water. Tyler began seeing things that couldn't be real. He saw buildings in the distance that disappeared when he got closer, patches of green vegetation in areas where nothing could grow, and even people walking toward him who vanished when he tried to call out to them. He understood that these were hallucinations caused by heat stroke, but they were becoming increasingly vivid and difficult to distinguish from reality. Around 8 p.m., Tyler collapsed beside the road, unable to continue walking. He had consumed all of his water and was exhibiting severe heat stroke symptoms, including confusion, slurred speech, and loss of motor control. His body temperature had risen to dangerous levels, and he was approaching the point where organ failure becomes irreversible. He lay in whatever shade he could find beside a small road sign, expecting to die within the next few hours. Tyler drifted in and out of consciousness as the sun finally began to set around 8:30 p.m. Even as darkness approached, the ambient temperature remained above 110 degrees, and the road's surface and rocks continued radiating heat they had absorbed during the day. Tyler was severely dehydrated, overheated, and showing signs of kidney failure and neurological damage from prolonged heat exposure. Around 10 p.m., Tyler was awakened by the sound of a vehicle approaching. A National Park Service ranger in a pickup truck stopped when he saw Tyler lying beside the road. Ranger Patricia Collins immediately recognized the signs of severe heat stroke and began emergency treatment. Pouring water over Tyler's head and body to cool him down and radioing for medical helicopter evacuation. Ranger Collins later explained that she had been conducting a routine patrol of the area and had not been responding to any emergency call. She typically didn't patrol that section of road after dark, but had decided to extend her route that evening to check on a broken water fountain at a remote rest area. If she hadn't made that unscheduled patrol, Tyler would almost certainly have died during the night. Tyler was airlifted to University Medical Center in Las Vegas, where he spent 4 days in intensive care being treated for severe heat stroke, dehydration, and kidney damage. His core body temperature when he arrived at the hospital was 108 degrees, which is often fatal. Doctors said that another hour of exposure would likely have caused irreversible organ damage or death. The investigation into Tyler's truck breakdown revealed that a small manufacturing defect in the water pump had caused it to fail prematurely. The defect was so minor that it wouldn't normally cause problems. But the extreme heat had caused the component to expand beyond its design tolerances, leading to catastrophic failure. Ford Motor Company later issued a recall for trucks with the same water pump design, citing Tyler's case as evidence of the potential danger. Tyler's satellite emergency beacon was examined by the manufacturer, who determined that the battery compartment had not been properly sealed against moisture, allowing humidity to cause corrosion over time. The extreme heat had accelerated the corrosion process, causing the device to fail when Tyler needed it most. The manufacturer redesigned the battery compartment and offered free replacements to customers with older models. Tyler recovered fully from his heat stroke after several weeks of medical treatment and rehabilitation. However, he suffered permanent kidney damage that requires ongoing monitoring and medication. He also developed a lasting sensitivity to heat that makes it dangerous for him to work in extreme temperatures, forcing him to change careers from construction to indoor office work. Tyler now advocates for better emergency preparedness education for desert travelers. He works with the National Park Service to distribute information about the dangers of Death Valley and the importance of having multiple backup communication methods when traveling in remote areas. He emphasizes that even experienced desert travelers with proper equipment can find themselves in life-threatening situations within minutes when things go wrong. The stretch of Death Valley, where Tyler's breakdown occurred, has since been equipped with additional emergency call boxes and improved cell phone coverage. The National Park Service has also increased ranger patrols during the hottest months of the year and installed better warning signs about the dangers of vehicle breakdown in extreme heat. Tyler still lives in Phoenix, but no longer drives through Death Valley or other remote desert areas during summer months. He flies to Las Vegas for business and takes northern routes when driving long distances. He carries multiple emergency communication devices and tells others that no schedule or deadline is worth risking your life in extreme conditions. The incident reinforced the understanding that Death Valley remains one of the most unforgiving environments in North America, where modern technology and careful preparation can still prove inadequate when faced with the extreme conditions that make this desert one of the deadliest places on Earth. Let's move to our sixth story. This incident occurred in May 2019 on Interstate 40 in New Mexico, at a rest stop between Albuquerque and Amarillo, where several women had gone missing over the previous 18 months. The person involved was Ashley Thompson, a 26-year-old traveling photographer from Seattle who was driving cross-country to document small-town America for a book project. Ashley had been on the road for 3 weeks, driving from town to town across the western United States and photographing local businesses, landmarks, and people she met along the way. She was an experienced solo traveler who had taken similar trips before and was comfortable driving long distances alone. Her 2017 Honda CR-V was equipped with a dash camera, GPS tracking system, and emergency supplies, and she maintained regular contact with her family through social media and phone calls. Ashley had spent 2 days in Albuquerque photographing the Old Town area and local art galleries, and was driving east toward Texas on Thursday evening around 11 p.m. She planned to drive through the night to reach Oklahoma by morning, where she had scheduled meetings with several local business owners she wanted to photograph. Traffic was light on Interstate 40, and she was making good time across the high desert of eastern New Mexico. Around 11:45 p.m., Ashley stopped at a rest area about 60 miles east of Albuquerque to use the restroom and stretch her legs. The rest stop was well lit and appeared to be maintained by the New Mexico Department of Transportation, with clean facilities and adequate lighting in the parking area. Several other vehicles were parked there, including 2 semi-trucks and a few passenger cars, which made Ashley feel safe about stopping alone at night. As Ashley was walking back to her car from the restroom building, She noticed a man sitting in a dark sedan parked about 3 spaces away from her Honda. The man appeared to be watching her, and when she made eye contact with him, he quickly looked away. Ashley had developed good instincts about potentially dangerous situations during her years of solo travel, and something about the man's behavior made her uncomfortable. Ashley got into her car and locked the doors. But before starting the engine, she took a moment to observe the man in her rearview mirror. He was middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap and dark jacket, and appeared to be alone in his vehicle. What concerned Ashley was that he seemed to be watching her car rather than using the rest stop facilities or preparing to leave. She decided to wait a few minutes to see if he would drive away first. After about 5 minutes, the man started his car and pulled out of the rest stop, heading east on Interstate 40 in the same direction Ashley was traveling. Ashley waited another few minutes before leaving, hoping to put some distance between herself and the suspicious vehicle. However, as she merged back onto the interstate, she noticed the same sedan about a quarter-mile ahead of her, traveling at exactly the speed limit. Ashley maintained her speed and tried to put the encounter out of her mind. But about 20 miles down the road, she noticed that the sedan had slowed down and was now behind her again. The driver was maintaining a consistent distance of about 300 yards, close enough to keep her in sight, but far enough away to avoid being obvious. When Ashley changed lanes, the sedan would change lanes a few seconds later. When she adjusted her speed, the sedan would match her speed after a brief delay. Becoming increasingly concerned that she was being followed, Ashley decided to test her suspicions by taking the next exit. If the sedan was simply traveling in the same direction, it would continue on the interstate. If it was following her, it would take the same exit. The sedan followed her off the interstate and onto the exit ramp, confirming Ashley's fears that she was being deliberately pursued. Ashley drove to a 24-hour truck stop at the exit, parking directly under the brightest lights she could find near the main building where other people would be visible. She went inside and approached the night clerk, a woman in her 50s named Carol, and explained that she believed someone was following her. Carol looked out the window and confirmed that the sedan Ashley described was parked at the edge of the lot, with its lights off. Carol told Ashley that she should call the police and offered to let her use the truck stop's phone since cell coverage in that area was unreliable. However, when Ashley tried to call 911, she was told that there was a significant delay for non-emergency calls and that an officer might not be available for several hours. The dispatcher advised her to drive to the nearest police station if she felt unsafe. But the closest station was more than 40 miles away. Ashley decided to wait at the truck stop until the sedan left, hoping that whoever was following her would give up and move on. She bought coffee and sat in the restaurant area where she could watch the parking lot through the windows. The sedan remained parked in the same location for over an hour, with the driver occasionally starting the engine but never leaving the lot. Around 2 a.m., Ashley noticed that there were now 2 vehicles parked together at the edge of the lot. The original sedan and a pickup truck that had arrived while she was inside. She could see figures moving between the 2 vehicles, suggesting that the drivers were communicating with each other. This development made Ashley realize that she might be dealing with more than one person, and that the situation was potentially more dangerous than she had initially thought. Carol, the truck stop clerk, told Ashley that she had seen similar situations before at that location. She explained that there had been several reports over the past year of women being followed from rest stops along that stretch of Interstate 40, and that at least 3 women had gone missing after stopping at various locations in the area. Carol advised Ashley not to continue traveling alone and suggested she call someone to come help her or wait until daylight when there would be more traffic on the road. Ashley called her brother Michael in Denver and explained the situation. Michael immediately began driving toward New Mexico, but told Ashley it would take him at least 6 hours to reach her location. He advised her to stay at the truck stop and not to leave alone under any circumstances. Ashley also contacted the FBI's tip line to report the incident, providing descriptions of the vehicles and their license plate numbers. Around 3:30 a.m., the two suspicious vehicles finally left the truck stop parking lot, heading east on Interstate 40. Ashley waited another hour to make sure they were gone before attempting to continue her trip. However, Carol strongly advised against traveling alone and offered to let Ashley sleep in the truck stop's break room until morning, when there would be more traffic and better police availability. Ashley decided to take Carol's advice and spent the rest of the night at the truck stop. When daylight came, she was preparing to continue her trip when a New Mexico State Police trooper arrived at the truck stop. Trooper James Wilson told Ashley that her call to the FBI had triggered an alert because it matched the pattern of several other incidents that were under federal investigation. Trooper Wilson explained that the FBI had been investigating a series of disappearances of women traveling alone on Interstate 40 through New Mexico and Texas. The victims had all been followed from rest stops or gas stations, and several witnesses had reported seeing women being approached by men in vehicles matching the descriptions Ashley had provided. The investigation suggested that an organized group was targeting solo female travelers along this corridor. Ashley provided detailed statements to both state and federal investigators, and her dash camera footage was examined for any additional evidence. The footage showed the sedan following her at various distances for nearly 2 hours, confirming her account of being pursued. License plate numbers captured by her camera were traced to vehicles that had been reported stolen in different states, indicating that the perpetrators were using stolen cars to avoid identification. 3 weeks later, Ashley received a call from FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez informing her that her report had helped lead to the arrest of 4 men who were part of a human trafficking operation that had been targeting women travelers along Interstate 40. The men had been using rest stops and truck stops to identify potential victims, then following them to isolated locations where they would force them off the road and abduct them. Agent Martinez told Ashley that at least 7 women had been confirmed as victims of this trafficking ring, and that several others were still missing. Ashley's decision to seek help at the truck stop and her detailed reporting of the incident had provided crucial evidence that helped investigators track down the perpetrators. The dash camera footage had been particularly valuable in establishing the pattern of surveillance and pursuit that the traffickers used. The 4 men were ultimately convicted on federal charges, including kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. 3 of them received life sentences, and the 4th received 35 years in prison. The investigation revealed that they had been operating along Interstate 40 for more than 2 years, targeting women who appeared to be traveling alone and were vulnerable to being isolated from help. Ashley completed her cross-country photography project, but changed her travel patterns significantly after the incident. She no longer travels alone at night, always informs multiple people of her exact travel plans and schedule, and stays in contact with family members every few hours when on the road. She also upgraded her vehicle's security systems and carries multiple communication devices in case of emergency. Ashley now speaks at travel safety seminars for women, emphasizing the importance of trusting instincts about potentially dangerous situations and seeking help immediately when something feels wrong. She points out that predators often target rest stops and truck stops because they know travelers are vulnerable when they're alone and far from home. The rest stop where Ashley first encountered her pursuers has since been equipped with additional security cameras and emergency call boxes. The New Mexico Department of Transportation has also increased lighting and signage warning travelers about the importance of personal safety when stopping at remote locations. Ashley's experience demonstrates how organized criminals increasingly target solo travelers, particularly women, who they perceive as easy victims. Her quick thinking and willingness to seek help from others undoubtedly prevented her from becoming another victim of this trafficking operation, and helped law enforcement shut down a dangerous criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Let's move to our seventh story. This incident occurred in September 2018 on Highway 2 in rural Montana, one of the most isolated stretches of road in the northern United States. The area is known for its vast distances between towns, limited cell phone coverage, and extreme weather conditions that can change rapidly. The person involved was Amelia Wu, a 32-year-old documentary filmmaker from San Francisco who was researching abandoned settlements and ghost towns across the American West. Amelia had been working on her documentary project for 8 months, traveling to remote locations throughout Nevada, Wyoming, and Montana to film the remains of mining towns, railroad communities, and farming settlements that had been abandoned during various economic downturns over the past century. She was an experienced traveler who had spent years filming in remote locations around the world, and she was comfortable working alone in isolated areas with minimal support. Amelia was driving her 2016 Jeep Cherokee, which she had equipped with professional video equipment, camping gear, emergency supplies, and a satellite communication device for areas without cell coverage. Her dash camera was constantly recording, both for security purposes and to capture interesting footage for potential use in her documentary. She had been documenting her travels extensively, maintaining detailed logs of locations, people she met, and interesting stories she encountered. On this particular evening in September, Amelia was driving west on Highway 2 toward Glacier National Park, where she planned to film an abandoned railroad town the next morning. She had spent the day in Havre, Montana, interviewing elderly residents about the history of nearby ghost towns, and was driving to a campground where she planned to spend the night. The weather was clear but cold, with temperatures expected to drop near freezing overnight. Around 9 p.m., approximately 40 miles east of the park entrance, Amelia encountered a road closure that wasn't marked on her GPS or mentioned in any current road reports she had checked. Orange construction barriers blocked the highway with a detour sign directing traffic onto a county road that led north through a mountainous area she wasn't familiar with. A construction worker in a reflective vest was directing traffic around the closure, and he told Amelia the detour would add about 30 miles to her trip, but would reconnect with Highway 2 further west. Amelia followed the detour route, which initially seemed legitimate with proper signage and what appeared to be recent construction work on the main highway. However, as she drove deeper into the mountainous area, the road became increasingly narrow and winding, passing through dense forest with no other traffic visible in either direction. After about 45 minutes of driving, she realized she should have reached the reconnection point with Highway 2, but instead found herself on an unmarked gravel road leading to what appeared to be a private compound. The compound consisted of several large buildings surrounded by high fencing, with bright security lights illuminating the entire area. As Amelia approached, she could see that the main gate was open and there were people moving around the buildings. A man in military-style clothing waved her forward, indicating that she should drive through the gate. Amelia hesitated, realizing that she had somehow been directed away from any public road onto private property. The man approached her vehicle and explained that the detour road had been damaged by recent rain and was temporarily impassable, but that she could stay at their facility overnight and continue her journey in the morning when the road conditions would be better. He was friendly and appeared genuinely helpful, explaining that they operated a wilderness training center and often helped stranded travelers who got lost on the confusing network of back roads in the area. Amelia was initially relieved to find help, but as she drove into the compound, she began to notice details that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The people she saw were all dressed in similar military-style clothing, and many of them were carrying firearms. The buildings appeared to be barracks or dormitories rather than typical civilian structures. Signs posted around the compound referenced operational security and authorized personnel only, suggesting this was some kind of military or paramilitary facility. When Amelia asked about the nature of the training center, the man who had initially helped her became evasive and suggested she should focus on getting some rest rather than asking questions about their operations. He directed her to park near a building that he said contained guest quarters and told her that someone would show her to a room where she could spend the night. However, Amelia noticed that her vehicle was now surrounded by other cars and trucks, making it difficult for her to leave quickly if necessary. As Amelia was escorted to the guest building, she observed what appeared to be weapons training taking place in a nearby area, with people practicing with rifles and tactical equipment. She also noticed that many of the vehicles parked around the compound had license plates from different states, and some had modifications like reinforced bumpers and tinted windows that suggested they might be used for activities requiring extra security or anonymity. The room Amelia was given was basic but clean, containing a bed, desk, and small bathroom. However, she discovered that the door could not be locked from the inside, and the windows were covered with heavy metal screens that prevented them from being opened. When she asked about these security features, she was told they were necessary to protect guests from wildlife in the area. But Amelia suspected the real purpose was to prevent people from leaving without permission. During the evening, Amelia heard what sounded like organized meetings or training sessions taking place in other buildings, with groups of people chanting or reciting material in unison. She also heard vehicles arriving and departing throughout the night, suggesting that the facility maintained active operations around the clock. Through her window, she could see guards patrolling the perimeter of the compound, which seemed excessive for a simple wilderness training facility. Unable to sleep due to her growing concerns about the situation, Amelia quietly activated her dash camera and satellite communication device to document what she was experiencing. She recorded audio of the activities she could hear and took photographs of the compound through her window. She also sent GPS coordinates and a brief message to her emergency contact in San Francisco, explaining that she had been detoured to an unknown location and felt unsafe. Around 3 a.m., Amelia heard vehicles starting up and people moving around outside her building. When she looked out her window, she could see groups of people loading equipment into trucks and preparing to leave the compound. The level of organization and military-style coordination suggested that this was some kind of planned operation rather than routine training activities. Amelia realized that she might have stumbled into a situation involving illegal activities or domestic extremism. At dawn, the man who had initially helped Amelia returned to escort her back to her vehicle. He explained that the road conditions had improved overnight and that she could now continue her journey safely. However, as they walked to her car, Amelia noticed that several of the buildings she had seen the night before appeared to be empty, and many of the vehicles that had been parked around the compound were gone. It seemed as though the facility had been rapidly evacuated during the night. When Amelia reached her vehicle, she discovered that someone had tampered with her dash camera, deleting most of the footage she had recorded since arriving at the compound. However, her satellite communication device had continued operating, and she had managed to transmit some photographs and location data to her emergency contact before the equipment was discovered and disabled. The man escorted Amelia to what he claimed was the repaired detour road, but instead of leading back to Highway 2, the route took her to a completely different highway, about 50 miles from where she had originally been detoured. When she asked how this was possible, she was told that there were multiple routes through the mountain area, and that this was simply the most direct way back to a main road. Amelia drove directly to the nearest town with cell phone coverage and contacted both local law enforcement and the FBI to report what she had experienced. Her description of the compound and its activities raised immediate concerns among federal investigators, who told her that they had been monitoring reports of extremist training camps in the Montana region. Special Agent Robert Chen of the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit interviewed Amelia extensively about her experience and examined the limited footage and data she had managed to preserve. Agent Chen explained that her account matched intelligence reports about a survivalist group that had been conducting paramilitary training and potentially planning violent actions against government targets. The GPS coordinates Amelia had transmitted to her emergency contact led federal agents to the location where she had been detained. But when they arrived with search warrants 2 days later, they found an abandoned facility with no evidence of recent occupation. The buildings were empty, and it appeared that the entire operation had been moved to a different location immediately after Amelia's visit. However, the investigation revealed that the road closure and detour that had led Amelia to the compound had been deliberately created by members of the extremist group. They had been using fake construction barriers to divert travelers, particularly those who appeared to be traveling alone, to their facility for surveillance and potential recruitment. Several other people reported being diverted by similar fake road closures in the same area over the previous months. The FBI was able to identify several members of the extremist group based on Amelia's descriptions and the limited photographic evidence she had captured. 6 months later, federal agents arrested 12 people associated with the group on charges including conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism, illegal weapons possession, and kidnapping. The investigation revealed that they had been planning attacks on federal facilities and had been using their remote training camp to prepare for violent actions. Amelia's documentary footage and testimony became crucial evidence in the prosecution of the extremist group. Her experience demonstrated how domestic terrorist organizations use remote locations and deceptive tactics to avoid detection while planning illegal activities. The case resulted in multiple convictions and lengthy prison sentences for the group's leaders. Amelia completed her documentary project, but now travels with security personnel when filming in remote locations. She also works with law enforcement agencies to provide training on recognizing signs of extremist activity in rural areas. Her experience led to increased federal monitoring of remote facilities in Montana and other western states, where similar groups are known to operate. The stretch of Highway 2 where Amelia was originally detoured has since been equipped with additional emergency communication equipment and increased patrol coverage by both state and federal law enforcement. Signs warn travelers to be suspicious of unofficial road closures and to report any unusual detours to authorities immediately. Let's move to our 8th story. This incident occurred on Halloween night, 2019, on the historic Route 66 in Arizona, specifically at mile marker 66, a location that has generated local folklore and reports of unusual phenomena for decades. The person involved was Chris Johnson, a 19-year-old college freshman from Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, who was driving to Phoenix to surprise his girlfriend for Halloween weekend. Chris had been dating Emma for 8 months, and she was attending Arizona State University while he studied engineering at Northern Arizona University. They had planned to spend Halloween together, but Chris had to work late at his campus job and told Emma he wouldn't be able to make the drive to Phoenix until Saturday morning. However, when he finished work earlier than expected on Friday night, he decided to surprise her by driving down Friday night and showing up at her dorm Saturday morning before she expected him. Chris left Flagstaff around 10 p.m. on Halloween night, driving his 2015 Honda Civic, planning to take the more scenic route along historic Route 66 rather than Interstate 17, which would be faster but less interesting. He enjoyed driving the old highway with its vintage motels, roadside attractions, and small desert towns that preserved the atmosphere of classic American road trips. The weather was clear and cool, perfect for a night drive through the high desert. Route 66 through Arizona passes through some spectacular but isolated country, with long stretches between towns where services are limited and cell phone coverage can be spotty. Chris was familiar with the route from previous trips and had driven it both day and night without incident. He had a full tank of gas, emergency supplies, and his phone was fully charged with a car charger available if needed. Around 11:30 p.m., Chris was driving through a particularly remote section of the highway when he noticed his car was making a strange noise from the engine area. The sound was rhythmic and metallic, suggesting a possible problem with the timing belt or another internal component. Chris was mechanically inclined and recognized that the noise could indicate serious engine trouble that might leave him stranded in the desert. Chris decided to pull over and inspect the engine, hoping to identify the problem and determine whether it was safe to continue driving. He stopped at mile marker 66, a location he had passed many times before, without giving it particular attention. The area was completely dark except for his headlights, with no other traffic visible in either direction and no lights from buildings or towns anywhere on the horizon. When Chris opened the hood and examined the engine with his phone's flashlight, he couldn't identify the source of the noise he had been hearing. The engine appeared to be running normally, with no obvious signs of mechanical problems. However, as he stood beside his car, listening to the engine idle, he realized that the metallic noise was continuing even though the engine was running smoothly and quietly. Chris looked around the immediate area to see if the sound might be coming from some other source, perhaps construction equipment or machinery in the distance. However, the landscape was empty desert with no structures or equipment visible anywhere nearby. The noise seemed to be coming from the ground beneath his feet, a rhythmic metallic clanking that sounded like heavy machinery operating underground. As Chris listened more carefully, he began to distinguish other sounds mixed with the mechanical noise. He could hear what sounded like voices calling out in distress, car engines revving frantically, and the screech of brakes and tires on asphalt. The sounds were muffled and seemed to be coming from below the highway surface, as if he was hearing the echo of traffic accidents that had occurred in the past. Chris walked a few yards away from his car to see if the sounds would become clearer or if he could determine their origin. As he moved around the area near mile marker 66, the sounds became more distinct and disturbing. He could clearly hear people screaming, metal crushing against metal, and the sounds of vehicles spinning out of control. It was as if he was experiencing the audio from multiple car accidents happening simultaneously beneath the ground. Chris tried to rationalize what he was hearing, thinking that perhaps there was an underground utility tunnel or mining operation that could explain the mechanical sounds, and that his imagination was filling in the details about voices and accidents. However, as he stood near the mile marker itself, he began to see flickering lights in his peripheral vision that seemed to be coming from the asphalt surface of the highway. When Chris looked directly at the road surface, he could see what appeared to be the ghostly outlines of vehicles moving along the highway. But they were translucent and seemed to be from different time periods. He saw what looked like classic cars from the 1950s and 1960s, along with more modern vehicles, all appearing to be driving along the same stretch of highway where he was standing. The vehicles would appear for a few seconds, then fade away, only to be replaced by different cars and trucks. Chris began to feel extremely uneasy and decided to return to his car and continue his drive to Phoenix immediately. However, when he reached his Honda, he discovered that the engine would not start. The battery seemed to be functional, as the lights and radio worked normally, but the starter would not engage and the engine would not turn over. Chris tried several times to start the car, but it remained completely unresponsive. As Chris sat in his car trying to figure out what to do, the ghostly traffic around him became more vivid and active. He could see entire accident scenes playing out on the highway, with cars colliding, spinning off the road, and bursting into flames. The sounds of screaming and crashing metal became louder and more disturbing. Chris realized he was witnessing some kind of supernatural replay of traffic accidents that had occurred at this location over many years. Chris tried to call for help on his cell phone, but discovered that he had no signal despite normally having coverage in this area. He attempted to use his phone's GPS to determine his exact location, but the app showed that he was in the middle of empty desert with no roads nearby, which was clearly incorrect since he was sitting on Route 66. His phone seemed to be malfunctioning in the same way as his car. Around 1 a.m., Chris noticed that the ghostly accidents he was witnessing seemed to be involving his car as well. He could see translucent versions of his Honda colliding with other vehicles, spinning off the road, and being involved in the same types of accidents as the other phantom cars. It appeared that he was somehow becoming part of the supernatural replay of past accidents, trapped in an endless loop of crashes that had occurred at mile marker 66. Chris decided that he needed to leave the area immediately, even if it meant abandoning his car and walking to the nearest town for help. However, when he tried to open his car door, he found that it would not move. The handles worked normally, but the doors seemed to be held shut by some invisible force. All 4 doors were similarly affected, as were the windows, which would not roll down despite the electrical system working normally. As Chris struggled to find a way out of his car, he noticed that the ghostly traffic around him was becoming more intense and violent. The accident scenes were now involving dozens of vehicles, with crashes occurring continuously in an overlapping pattern that filled the entire visible area of highway. The sounds of metal crushing, tires screeching, and people screaming became overwhelming, creating a cacophony of disaster that seemed to be building toward some kind of climax. Around 2 a.m., Chris saw what appeared to be the most recent accident in the supernatural replay. A car identical to his own Honda Civic was involved in a head-on collision with a semi-truck, resulting in a massive explosion and fire. As this scene played out, Chris realized that he might be witnessing a precognition of his own death, and that he had somehow become trapped in a time loop that would end with his participation in a fatal accident. Desperate to escape, Chris began trying to break his car windows using his emergency kit tools. However, the glass seemed to be supernaturally strengthened and would not crack or shatter, despite his repeated attempts. As he worked frantically to find a way out, the phantom accidents around him continued to intensify, and he could feel his car beginning to move involuntarily, as if it was being drawn into the supernatural traffic pattern. Just before 3 a.m., as Chris felt his car beginning to accelerate on its own toward what appeared to be an inevitable collision with a ghostly semi-truck, he made a desperate decision to try communicating with the supernatural forces that seemed to control the area. He began speaking aloud, acknowledging the deaths that had occurred at this location and expressing his respect for the victims of past accidents. Chris told the spirits that he understood he had intruded on their space and that he meant no disrespect to those who had died at mile marker 66. He promised that if he was allowed to leave safely, he would make sure that others knew about the dangers of this location and would work to prevent future accidents from occurring there. As he spoke, the intensity of the ghostly accidents began to diminish, and the sounds of crashing and screaming gradually faded. Around 3:30 a.m., Chris felt his car door suddenly open freely, and his engine started immediately when he turned the key. The ghostly traffic disappeared completely, and the area returned to normal silence and darkness. Chris quickly drove away from mile marker 66 and continued to Phoenix without stopping, arriving at Emma's dorm around 5 a.m. in a state of shock and exhaustion. Chris reported his experience to the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and learned that mile marker 66 on Route 66 had indeed been the site of numerous fatal accidents over the decades. The location's combination of highway design, lighting conditions, and wildlife crossings had made it statistically one of the most dangerous spots on the historic route, with over 30 documented fatalities since the 1950s. Following Chris's report, the Arizona Department of Transportation conducted a safety analysis of the mile marker 66 area and implemented several improvements, including enhanced lighting, wildlife barriers, and improved signage warning drivers about the accident history. The number of accidents at that location has decreased significantly since these safety measures were installed. Chris changed his major from engineering to paranormal research and now investigates reports of supernatural highway phenomena across the American Southwest. He believes his experience at mile marker 66 demonstrates that traumatic events can leave permanent impressions on physical locations, creating supernatural replays that sensitive individuals can witness under specific conditions. Let's move to our 9th story. This incident occurred in December 2020 on Interstate 35 in Texas, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when many businesses were closed and fewer people were traveling late at night. The person involved was Maria Santos, a 29-year-old registered nurse who was driving between hospitals as part of her job covering night shifts at multiple medical facilities during the staff shortages caused by the pandemic. Maria had been working as a traveling nurse for 3 years, but the pandemic had created unprecedented demand for her services. She was covering night shifts at 2 different hospitals in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, driving between them several times per week. Her route typically took her on Interstate 35 between Arlington and Dallas, a drive she had made dozens of times and knew well. She was driving her 2019 Toyota Corolla, which was equipped with a factory navigation system that she relied on for traffic updates and route optimization. On this particular night in December, Maria was driving from Presbyterian Hospital Arlington to Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas for a 3 a.m. shift change. She had finished her shift in Arlington at 2 a.m. and needed to be in Dallas by 3 a.m. to relieve another nurse who was covering a double shift. The drive normally took about 45 minutes, giving her just enough time to make the transition between hospitals. Maria left Arlington around 2:05 a.m. and initially followed her usual route north on Interstate 35. Traffic was extremely light due to the late hour and pandemic restrictions, with only occasional trucks and emergency vehicles on the road. The weather was clear and cold, with no precipitation or visibility issues that would complicate the drive. Around 2:25 a.m., as Maria was approaching downtown Dallas, her car's navigation system suddenly announced a traffic alert and began directing her to take an alternate route. The system indicated that there was a major accident ahead on Interstate 35 that would cause significant delays and recommended taking the next exit to avoid the congestion. Maria could see the red traffic indicators on her GPS display showing stopped traffic ahead. Maria trusted her navigation system and took the recommended exit, which led her onto surface streets through an industrial area she wasn't familiar with. The GPS continued providing turn-by-turn directions, leading her through a maze of side streets and frontage roads that seemed to be taking her around the reported accident. However, as she drove through this area, Maria noticed that the streets were completely empty and many of the businesses appeared to be abandoned. After following the GPS directions for about 15 minutes, Maria began to suspect that something was wrong. She should have been approaching downtown Dallas by now, but instead found herself in an increasingly isolated industrial area with no signs of the city's skyline or familiar landmarks. The GPS continued, directing her to make turns onto progressively smaller and darker streets, leading her away from any major roads or well-lit areas. Around 2:45 a.m., the GPS directed Maria to turn into what appeared to be an industrial complex or warehouse district. As she made the turn, she noticed that the area ahead was blocked by what looked like an accident scene, with emergency vehicles, flashing lights, and several cars scattered across the roadway. Thinking this might be the accident her GPS had been routing her around, Maria slowed down to assess the situation. As Maria approached the scene, a man wearing what appeared to be a police uniform waved her over to the side of the road. He approached her car and explained that there had been a serious multi-vehicle accident and that she would need to wait while they cleared the roadway. He asked for her driver's license and insurance information, which seemed like a routine request from a police officer managing an accident scene. However, as Maria handed over her documents, she began to notice details that made her suspicious. The man's uniform didn't match the standard Dallas Police Department design, and his vehicle, while it had emergency lights, didn't have proper police markings. Additionally, the accident scene itself looked staged, with the damaged vehicles positioned in ways that seemed artificial rather than the result of actual collisions. Maria also realized that she had been recording voice memos on her phone to update her husband about her work schedule, and the recording was still running. She quietly continued the recording, hoping to document whatever was happening in case she needed evidence later. She began to suspect that she had been deliberately directed to this location by someone who had compromised her GPS system. The fake police officer returned with Maria's documents and told her that she would need to move her car to a specific parking area while they finished processing the accident scene. He directed her to drive to a location that was even more isolated and poorly lit, away from any potential witnesses or help. Maria realized that she was likely being set up for a carjacking, kidnapping, or worse. Instead of following the fake officer's directions, Maria told him that she needed to call her supervisor at the hospital to report that she would be late for her shift. She pretended to be making a phone call while actually activating her phone's emergency features, including location sharing and automatic recording. She also noticed that her actual GPS showed her location as being several miles away from any accident that had been reported on traffic networks. As Maria pretended to talk on her phone, she observed the supposed accident scene more carefully and realized that none of the people involved appeared to be actual accident victims or legitimate emergency responders. The damaged vehicles had no real accident debris around them, and the people moving around the scene were all healthy adult males who seemed to be coordinating their activities rather than dealing with an emergency. Maria decided that she needed to leave immediately, regardless of what the fake officer told her to do. She told him that she had been ordered by hospital administration to proceed to her assignment immediately because of a patient emergency, and that she would have to drive around the accident scene using an alternate route. Before he could respond, she put her car in reverse and quickly backed away from the area. The fake officer and several other men immediately ran toward their vehicles and began pursuing Maria as she tried to navigate back to a main road. She could see multiple sets of headlights following her as she drove through the industrial complex, trying to find an exit that would lead her back to familiar territory. Her GPS system was still malfunctioning, showing her location incorrectly and providing directions that led deeper into the isolated area. Maria realized that her GPS had been hacked or compromised, and that the criminals had used her navigation system to lead her into a trap. She turned off the GPS and began navigating based on her general sense of direction, trying to head toward the lights of downtown Dallas that were visible in the distance. She called 911 while driving, but had difficulty explaining her exact location because she didn't know where she was. Around 3:15 a.m., Maria managed to reach a main road that she recognized, and her pursuers stopped following her once she was in an area with better lighting and potential witnesses. She drove directly to Baylor University Medical Center and reported the incident to hospital security, who immediately contacted Dallas police. She was over an hour late for her shift, but her supervisor was understanding once she explained what had happened. Dallas Police Detective Robert Kim investigated Maria's report and discovered that her experience was part of a pattern of similar incidents involving GPS manipulation and fake accident scenes. The investigation revealed that criminals were using sophisticated technology to hack into vehicle navigation systems and redirect drivers to predetermined locations where they could be robbed, carjacked, or worse. Detective Kim explained that the criminals had been monitoring traffic patterns and identifying lone drivers, particularly healthcare workers who were traveling predictable routes during night shifts. They would hack into the vehicle's GPS systems using cellular network vulnerabilities and create fake traffic alerts to justify routing drivers to isolated locations where accomplices were waiting with staged accident scenes. The investigation led to the arrest of 7 people who were part of an organized criminal network specializing in GPS-based crimes. They had been operating in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for over 8 months, targeting healthcare workers, delivery drivers, and other people who traveled alone during night hours. The group had sophisticated computer equipment that allowed them to intercept and manipulate GPS signals within specific geographic areas. Maria's voice recording provided crucial evidence for the prosecution, as it captured the entire sequence of events, including the fake officer's instructions and the sounds of the pursuit. Her quick thinking in recognizing the danger and refusing to comply with the criminal's directions prevented her from becoming a victim and helped law enforcement identify and shut down the operation. The case resulted in federal charges because the criminals had been using technology to interfere with navigation systems across state lines. All 7 defendants received lengthy prison sentences for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and technology crimes. The investigation also revealed that similar operations were active in other major metropolitan areas across the United States. Following this incident, Maria changed her work patterns and now carpools with other nurses when possible. She also uses multiple navigation apps simultaneously and compares their recommendations to identify potential discrepancies that might indicate tampering. She carries additional emergency communication devices and has learned to recognize signs that her GPS might be compromised. The Texas Department of Public Safety has since issued warnings about GPS manipulation crimes and advises drivers to be suspicious of unexpected route changes, especially those that lead to isolated areas. They recommend using multiple navigation sources and trusting personal knowledge of familiar routes over GPS directions when something seems unusual. Maria now speaks at healthcare workers' safety seminars about technology-based crimes targeting essential workers. Her experience demonstrates how criminals increasingly use sophisticated methods to exploit people's reliance on technology, and how important it is to maintain situational awareness even when using trusted navigation systems. The stretch of Interstate 35, where Maria was originally traveling, has been equipped with additional emergency call boxes and increased patrol coverage during night hours when essential workers are most vulnerable to these types of crimes. Let's move to our 10th story. This incident occurred in February 2021 on Interstate 84 in Idaho, a route that passes through some of the most remote and mountainous terrain in the northwestern United States. The person involved was Kevin Luce, a 42-year-old traveling salesman who had been driving the same route between Salt Lake City and Portland for over 15 years as part of his job selling industrial equipment to manufacturing companies. Kevin was one of the most experienced long-distance drivers in his company, having logged over 2 million miles during his career without a single accident or major incident. He knew Interstate 84 through Idaho better than almost any other road, having driven it more than 200 times over the years. His 2018 Ford Fusion was meticulously maintained and equipped with multiple navigation systems, emergency supplies, and communication devices for traveling through remote areas. On this particular trip in February, Kevin was driving from Salt Lake City to Portland to meet with several clients about new equipment installations. He had left Salt Lake City around 6 p.m. on a Monday evening, planning to drive through the night and arrive in Portland by Tuesday morning. The weather forecast showed clear conditions across Idaho with no storms or significant snow expected, which was typical for the route during winter months. Kevin entered Idaho around 8 p.m. and began the familiar drive north through the mountainous terrain along the Snake River. This section of Interstate 84 was one he had traveled countless times, and he knew every exit, rest stop, and landmark along the way. He typically made the drive from the Utah border to the Oregon border in about 5.5 hours, depending on traffic and weather conditions. Around midnight, as Kevin was driving through a section of the highway near Twin Falls, he noticed that his fuel gauge was reading lower than expected for the distance he had traveled. He had filled up completely in Salt Lake City and should have had enough fuel to reach his usual stop in Baker City, Oregon. But the gauge showed he was already down to half a tank. This was unusual because his car typically got excellent fuel economy on highway driving. Kevin decided to stop for fuel at the next exit, which according to his memory and GPS should have been exit 173 near Shoshone. However, when he reached what should have been exit 173, the signs indicated it was exit 168, which was a location he had already passed about 30 miles earlier. Kevin was confused, but thought perhaps he had misremembered the exit numbers, so he continued driving to look for the next fuel stop. After driving for another 45 minutes, Kevin reached what appeared to be the same exit again, still marked as exit 168. This was clearly impossible, as he had been driving consistently north and should have been encountering higher numbered exits. Kevin checked his odometer and GPS, but both indicated that he had been driving the correct distance and direction. However, the highway signs continued to show the same exit number. Kevin decided to take exit 168 to see if he could find a gas station and figure out what was happening with the highway signage. The exit led to the same small town he remembered from previous trips, but when he drove through the area looking for fuel, all the businesses appeared to be closed, even though his car's clock showed it was only 12:45 a.m., which was early for a Monday night in a town along a major interstate. Kevin returned to the interstate and continued driving north. But within another hour, he encountered the same exit 168 again. This time he was certain something was wrong, as he had been driving continuously north on Interstate 84 for over 3 hours, but kept arriving at the same location. His GPS showed that he was making progress along the highway, but the physical landmarks and exit signs indicated he was traveling in some kind of loop. As Kevin continued driving, he began to notice other anomalies that suggested something beyond simple confusion or misreading of signs. His car's clock had stopped advancing, remaining stuck at 12:47 a.m. despite the passage of time he could measure by counting. His fuel gauge was also frozen at the quarter tank mark, neither increasing nor decreasing despite continuing to drive. The radio was playing the same songs in the same order repeatedly, as if the stations were caught in their own loops. Around what Kevin estimated was 2 a.m., based on his internal sense of time, he encountered another vehicle on the highway for the first time since entering the loop. It was a semi-truck traveling in the same direction, and Kevin was relieved to see another driver who might be able to explain what was happening. Kevin flashed his lights and honked his horn to get the truck driver's attention, and the trucker responded by pulling over at a rest area. The truck driver was an elderly man named Frank, who told Kevin that he had been driving the same section of Interstate 84 for what felt like several hours, repeatedly passing the same landmarks and exits. Frank explained that he had been making this same run between Salt Lake City and Portland for over 20 years, but had never experienced anything like the current situation. His truck's GPS and communication equipment were showing the same malfunctions as Kevin's car. Frank told Kevin that he had encountered two other drivers who were experiencing the same phenomenon. A woman in a minivan who said she had been trying to reach Boise for her daughter's wedding, and a young man in a pickup truck who was driving to a job site in Oregon. All of them were trapped in what appeared to be a temporal or spatial loop that prevented them from making progress along the highway despite continuous driving. Kevin and Frank decided to convoy together and try different strategies to escape the loop. They attempted driving in the opposite direction, but encountered the same exits and landmarks in reverse order, suggesting that the loop extended in both directions. They tried taking different exits, but each one led to the same small town with closed businesses and no people visible anywhere. They attempted using their CB radios and cell phones to call for help, but could only reach each other and the other trapped drivers. As the night progressed, Kevin began to experience physical and psychological symptoms that suggested the loop was affecting more than just his vehicle's systems. He felt increasingly disoriented and began having difficulty remembering details about his life outside the highway. His memories of his family, job, and home became vague and distant, as if the loop was somehow isolating him, not just physically, but mentally from the outside world. The other drivers reported similar experiences, with Frank mentioning that he was having trouble remembering his wife's name, and the woman in the minivan saying she couldn't recall what her daughter looked like. It seemed that the longer they remained in the loop, the more their connection to their normal lives was being severed, as if the highway was gradually erasing their identities and trapping them permanently. Around what Kevin estimated was dawn, based on subtle changes in the darkness rather than any actual sunrise, he made a desperate decision to deliberately crash his car in hopes of breaking the supernatural hold the highway seemed to have on him. He reasoned that if the loop was maintaining the illusion of normal driving, disrupting that pattern might allow him to escape, or at least change his situation. Kevin drove his car off the highway at moderate speed, aiming for a snowbank that would cushion the impact, but still cause enough damage to disable the vehicle. As his car left the pavement and struck the snowbank, Kevin felt a sudden rush of sensations. Cold air, the smell of exhaust fumes, and intense dizziness. He lost consciousness as his car came to rest against a concrete barrier. Kevin woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Twin Falls, Idaho, where he was being treated for carbon monoxide poisoning and hypothermia. Medical staff told him that he had been found unconscious in his car, which had slid off Interstate 84 during a snowstorm and become stuck in a snowbank with the engine running. The exhaust pipe had been blocked by snow, causing carbon monoxide to build up in the passenger compartment and poison him while he was trapped. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who treated Kevin's carbon monoxide poisoning, explained that the symptoms he had experienced were consistent with severe CO exposure, which can cause hallucinations, disorientation, memory loss, and a distorted sense of time. The carbon monoxide had affected his brain's ability to process sensory information correctly, creating the illusion that he was driving continuously when he was actually unconscious in his stranded vehicle. The investigation revealed that Kevin had encountered an unexpected snowstorm shortly after midnight on Monday night, which had not been predicted by weather services. His car had slid off the highway during whiteout conditions and become trapped in a snowdrift with the exhaust pipe blocked. He had remained unconscious in the vehicle for nearly 60 hours before being discovered by highway maintenance crews. Kevin's experience demonstrates how carbon monoxide poisoning can create extremely vivid and coherent hallucinations that seem completely real to the victim. His brain had constructed an elaborate scenario involving time loops and other supernatural elements to explain the disorientation and confusion caused by the toxic gas. The other drivers he remembered meeting were likely products of his poisoned mind rather than real people. Kevin recovered fully from the carbon monoxide exposure after several weeks of medical treatment. but the experience left him with lasting concerns about winter driving safety. He now carries multiple carbon monoxide detectors in his vehicle and has installed additional safety equipment, including emergency beacons and communication devices that work independently of his car's electrical system. The section of Interstate 84 where Kevin's accident occurred has since been equipped with additional weather monitoring stations and emergency communication equipment to help prevent similar incidents. Idaho Department of Transportation has also improved snow removal procedures to reduce the risk of vehicles becoming trapped in unexpected storms. Kevin continues working as a traveling salesman, but now follows strict protocols for winter travel, including carrying emergency supplies for extended survival and checking weather conditions multiple times before departing. His experience serves as a warning about how quickly winter driving conditions can become life-threatening, and how carbon monoxide poisoning can create dangerous illusions that prevent victims from recognizing their actual situation. Let's move to our 11th and final story. This incident is different from the others because it involves me personally, the researcher who has been investigating these highway phenomena for the past 3 years. After documenting and verifying the 10 previous cases, I decided in June 2022 to retrace some of these routes myself, hoping to understand the common factors that might explain these disturbing experiences. What happened during that cross-country trip changed everything I thought I knew about America's highways. My name is Mason, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, I've been investigating highway disappearances and anomalies since 2019 when my cousin vanished during a routine drive from Denver to Phoenix. The official investigation concluded that he had likely fallen asleep at the wheel and driven into a remote canyon. But his body and vehicle were never found, despite extensive searches. His disappearance led me to discover the patterns I've been sharing with you tonight. After completing my research on the 10 cases you've heard, I realized that all of these incidents had occurred along specific corridors that formed a rough network across the American West. Interstate 80 through Nevada, Highway 50 through Nevada, Interstate 75 through Georgia, Highway 101 along the Oregon coast, Death Valley roads in California, Interstate 40 through New Mexico, Highway 2 in Montana, Route 66 in Arizona, Interstate 35 in Texas, and Interstate 84 through Idaho. These routes seem to share certain characteristics: extreme isolation, limited cell coverage, and histories of unexplained disappearances. I decided to drive a route that would connect several of these locations, documenting everything with multiple cameras, GPS trackers, and communication devices. My plan was to start in San Francisco, drive to Nevada, then through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and eventually to Montana, covering approximately 3,000 miles over 10 days. I equipped my 2020 Honda Pilot with dash cameras, emergency beacons, satellite communication equipment, and enough supplies to survive for a week if stranded. The first 3 days of my trip went exactly as planned. I retraced Sandra's route on Interstate 80 through Nevada, stopped at the location where Jeffrey and Jacob claimed to have found the Desert Rose Motel, and drove through the area near exit 127 where David Park had been pursued by criminals. I documented everything meticulously, taking photographs and measurements, interviewing local residents, and cross-referencing my findings with official records. On day 4, while driving through Arizona near the Route 66 location where Chris Johnson had experienced supernatural phenomena at mile marker 66, I began to notice that my electronic equipment was behaving strangely. My dash cameras would occasionally show static or display images that didn't match what I was seeing through my windshield. My GPS would briefly show impossible locations, indicating I was in the middle of oceans or foreign countries, before correcting itself. I initially attributed these malfunctions to the remote desert environment and potential interference from military installations known to operate in the area. However, as I continued driving, the anomalies became more frequent and more disturbing. My satellite phone would receive calls from numbers that didn't exist, playing recordings of voices that sounded like the people from the stories I had been investigating. On day 5, while driving through New Mexico on Interstate 40, I received a call on my regular cell phone from a number listed as my own. When I answered, I heard my own voice telling me to take the next exit and drive to a specific address. The voice provided detailed directions to a location I had never been to. But when I checked my notes, I realized it was describing the exact area where Ashley Thompson had been pursued by human traffickers. I did not follow the directions from the mysterious call, but I began to understand that somehow my research had made me a target of the same forces that had affected the other travelers. It seemed that by investigating these incidents so thoroughly, I had attracted the attention of whatever was responsible for the phenomena. My equipment continued to malfunction in ways that paralleled the experiences described by previous victims. On day 6, while driving through Texas, I encountered the most disturbing incident of my trip. My GPS suddenly directed me to take an exit that led to an abandoned industrial area, claiming there was an accident ahead on the main highway. I recognized this as the same tactic that had been used against Maria Santos, so I ignored the GPS and continued on Interstate 35. However, my car's systems began to fail one by one. First the air conditioning, then the radio, then the power steering. By the time I reached a truck stop to seek help, my car was barely functioning, and all of my electronic equipment had shut down completely. The truck stop clerk told me that several other drivers had stopped that night with similar mechanical and electrical failures, all of them solo travelers who had been driving the same general route I was following. It became clear that something was systematically targeting people who traveled alone through these specific areas. I called my research partner from a payphone at the truck stop and discovered that my disappearance had already been reported to authorities. According to my partner, I had missed 3 scheduled check-ins, and my GPS tracking devices had gone offline 2 days earlier. From his perspective, I had been missing for 48 hours. But from my perspective, I had been driving continuously and maintaining regular communication. The investigation into my experience revealed that I had somehow lost 2 complete days during my journey. With no memory of where I had been or what I had done during that time, my car's odometer showed I had driven over 800 additional miles beyond what my planned route should have required. But I had no recollection of this extra driving. Security footage from gas stations and truck stops showed me making stops and purchases during the missing time period. But I appeared to be in a trance-like state. Federal investigators who reviewed my case determined that my research had uncovered evidence of a coordinated operation involving multiple criminal organizations, domestic extremist groups, and possibly foreign intelligence services that were using America's isolated highways as a testing ground for advanced surveillance and control technologies. My investigation had inadvertently exposed a network of activities that various groups preferred to keep hidden. The analysis of my electronic equipment revealed that it had been subjected to sophisticated electromagnetic interference that was designed to disrupt communications and navigation systems. The technology involved was far beyond what typical criminals would have access to, suggesting state-level capabilities or highly advanced private operations. My equipment had been systematically compromised to isolate me and make me vulnerable to whatever the perpetrators had planned. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that several of the cases I had investigated were connected in ways I hadn't previously understood. The same vehicles, license plate numbers, and even individual people appeared in multiple incidents across different states and time periods. What I had thought were isolated incidents were actually part of a larger pattern of systematic testing and refinement of techniques for controlling and manipulating highway travelers. The FBI's investigation, triggered by my research and subsequent disappearance, led to the discovery of hidden facilities along several major highways corridors where advanced psychological and technological warfare techniques were being developed and tested. The investigation is ongoing and classified, but agents told me that my work had helped expose activities that posed a significant threat to national security. I was advised to cease my investigation and avoid traveling alone on remote highways for my own safety. However, I was also told that my research had provided crucial intelligence that was helping federal authorities understand and combat a threat they had only recently become aware of. The 10 cases I documented were apparently just the visible edge of a much larger and more dangerous phenomenon. Since returning from my aborted research trip, I've experienced ongoing surveillance and harassment that confirms the reality of the threat I uncovered. My phone is monitored, my internet activity is tracked, and I've noticed vehicles following me during routine daily activities. Whatever I stumbled into during my highway research is far more serious and far-reaching than simple criminal activity or supernatural phenomena. The truth about America's highways is more disturbing than any of the individual stories I've shared tonight. Our road system has become a testing ground for technologies and techniques that can control, manipulate, and disappear people without leaving any trace of what happened to them. The isolated stretches of highway that connect our communities have been weaponized against the very people who depend on them for travel and commerce. I'm sharing these stories not to entertain you with tales of the supernatural or unusual, but to warn you about a very real threat that exists on America's highways today. The people whose experiences I've documented were not victims of ghosts, aliens, or unexplained phenomena. They were test subjects in experiments designed to perfect methods of control that could eventually be used against anyone who travels our roads. Be careful out there. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, get help immediately. And remember that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who appear to be offering assistance. Thank you for listening to these 11 disturbing true road trip horror stories. If you've experienced anything similar to what you've heard tonight, please consider documenting your experience and reporting it to appropriate authorities. The patterns we've uncovered suggest that these incidents are more common than anyone realizes. For more content exploring the dark realities hidden in plain sight across America, subscribe to our channel and follow us at Verified Fears. We'll continue investigating the stories that others are afraid to tell, because the truth about what's happening on our highways needs to be heard. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that are completely true.